Hi, and welcome to another episode of the First Time Homebuyers Podcast. I am one of your two co-hosts, Tom Sommers, with Coldwell Banker Burnett in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. And as always, I am joined by my co-host, Eric McKenna, with RE/MAX Advanced in the Pittsburgh area. How are you?
How y'all doing today? I'm doing great.
All right. So we are ready and pumped up to tell you all kinds of interesting information. Today, we are going to talk about appraisals. This is something that
we have to.
Yeah, we do. And this is something that's really confusing for a lot of people. So I think it's really important that we just go through some things for buyers so you understand why, where, how. Eric, as always, do you want to take the first swipe?
Absolutely. As you've gone through the buying process to purchase your home, one of the variables that is involved that we as the buyers really don't have much say in. It's kind of one of the variables that's really a little bit out of our control, and that is that when you go for your mortgage, the mortgage company is going to inquire about the actual value of the home just to make sure that this mortgage note they're giving you, this money they're fronting you for this property, that the house is actually worth that amount. So they're going to send out an appraiser, a skilled appraiser that will go out and do comps, very similar to what the listing agent did when they derived the price, but a little more in detail. And they're going to come back with a value, and hopefully that value is right at the listing or the asking price, or hopefully at the least at the negotiated sale price, or a little bit higher. If it does come in correct at that number or higher, then indeed we're ready to go. The mortgage will flow through correctly. The house did appraise. Okay, and sometimes I think the appraisals get confusing sometimes for buyers. They're nothing that we control, nothing that the other side of the equation controls. It's strictly a price determination based upon a registered appraiser that your mortgage company dictates.
And to kind of go on that point, years ago, before the bubble, usually a loan officer would have a handful of appraisers that they would use. And it wasn't to be deceptive. It was just easy business practice to say, okay, well, gosh, I have a house that I have a client who's trying to purchase in this particular neighborhood. Well, I know at least one appraiser who works that area, which makes sense. Now everything goes into a pool. The loan officer makes a request, and then that appraiser is just randomly chosen. So for me, my biggest fear as a buyer's agent, or actually even more so as a listing agent, is are we going to get an appraiser who actually knows this area? Because I'm sure no matter where you're listening or watching from right now, if I asked you what's the more affluent neighborhood in your area versus one that is not, you could tell me that. Not good or bad, but the point is that there's a specific reason why a 2,000 square foot home sells for $200 a square foot in one area, but yet the same house in another area is worth $125. So you as the buyer are going to be privy to that appraisal. So when the appraisal comes back, you'll know exactly what it appraised for. And like Eric was saying, if it comes in at value, we've got no issues. If it comes in higher than value, woohoo, that's fantastic for you, and you're gaining a little equity. You don't ever share that with the seller. You simply say to them, it came in at value, no issues. Okay, but the tricky thing is if it comes in below value, what do? Eric?
Well, I can tell you from experience, it's only happened to me twice. Knock on laminate here. It's only happened to me twice. But obviously, the two parties hopefully can come to an agreement. Now, you are the buyer of the property. So, in essence, to some degree, you're holding all the cards at the immediate learning of the underappraisal. Now, it depends on how far the property comes in underneath. If it's a couple $1,000s, oftentimes the buyer wants to buy and the seller wants to sell. And providing the buyer isn't absolutely strapped to their umpteenth penny, there usually is a little wiggle room. And oftentimes, if it's a couple $1,000s, the seller will agree to meet the buyer halfway there. The buyer may give a little more and the seller may give a little more, and they'll meet. It oftentimes, in my experience from just watching other agents, my fellow agents and their issues, and like I said, I've been very fortunate. I've seen them come under, sometimes 10, 15, $20,000 under, and that becomes a more difficult negotiation. And oftentimes the buyer, the buyer, may not want to acquire this property for a certain dollar figure if it didn't appraise for that figure, and there's a significant difference. So it all comes down, like everything else in real estate, to negotiation, but it really depends on how far the undervalue is as to how far each party will move. But if you want to buy the house and the seller wants to sell the house, you will come to a number, has been my experience.
Yeah. And to further the point of one that comes in low, if you're the buyer, you are not tied into purchasing the home then if it does
Right.
not appraise for the purchase agreement, because the loan officer or the lender won't lend you the money any more than what it's worth. So that's where the renegotiation stands. So you have a choice. You can just plain walk away or you can renegotiate. But it's important to note that just because the appraisal came in $10,000 below what your offer price was doesn't mean that the seller absolutely has to sell it to you for that. They have the right also to let you go and look for another buyer. But where it works to your advantage is if you're purchasing with an FHA. That is a government loan, so it doesn't matter who you go to get that loan. That appraisal is tied to the property for 6 months, meaning any other buyer that comes along that's FHA has to use that appraisal. So
Correct.
it puts the seller in a really tough spot, because now they either have to find a cash buyer or a conventional buyer. So there's give and take on both sides of it. But I also want to address this for sellers as well, because I know we've had some sellers that have tuned into some of our podcasts. I want to make it very clear that this is a critical piece of your agent's duty to you. When I have a house that sells, I have all of my comps, my notes, features, and everything. I put together a booklet for that appraiser. Now, I'm not trying to influence him, but I'm trying to give him or her all the information I have so they can understand where or how I came to where we are right now. And I'm trying to just hedge my bet that I have someone who actually knows the area. And I'm telling you, it is not a stretch. I've had several appraisers who have come through a house that live 75 miles away from this house. So you have to prepare. So that's another reason why the appraisals don't come in low for me. I've had a few, because every once in a while you're going to get an appraiser who is just whatever. But usually it's a pretty reasonable assumption you'll get to where the sale price is if the comps that you're doing support it in the first place.
It's exactly correct. And I will add too, Tommy, before I forget, this is what some of reality television real estate shows do the industry and do the general public a disservice. When you see things like, $15,000 above list and all these competitive bidding circumstances, and just talking about how the trend in the market is such that, the seller can list up to 340, but it, 6 months ago it was 320. It's not entirely real world. As Tommy mentioned, if you don't have on the listing end, if you don't have a wonderful realtor who's going to do real comps and really explain to you where your range is price-wise to list a home, and be honest with the listing, with the lister, with the seller, that, hey, if you do want to get a little aggressive here, I still want to work with you, but I have to tell you up front very vehemently that I feel we're above where you may get appraised. So it is a tightrope that we have to walk. We certainly want the business. We want to work with sellers, and we want their enthusiasm, but at the same time, everything must be tempered, because it isn't just throwing the highest number and see what sticks. It's not what it's about. We have to make sure that house can appraise for a potential buyer. It's a huge responsibility.
Yeah, and it's worth what you're willing to pay for it. It's like anything else in the market. But having said that, go ahead and do as much independent searching as you want, but you really need to rely on your real estate agent who's representing you to help you determine where, or the kind of range of where you should start with your offer. I don't believe there are any websites out there at this time that will give you, the buyer, accurate information like we will get off the MLS. Because one of the things we do when we look at houses, whether it be listing a home or for helping a buyer, is we look at that house exactly like an appraiser would. And if we can prove that the value is there, so be it. If we can't, we're going to tell you that, so at least you know if the appraisal comes back, you're prepared. Because who wants to spend $400 and some odd on an inspection, then another $450 to $500 on appraisal? Now you're $1,000 in, and now find out that you can't buy the house?
Right.
Because it doesn't appraise. So there's a lot going on here. Again, our value isn't finding a house. Anyone can find a house. You, as a consumer, can jump online and find homes all day long. My value and Eric's value is representing you so that you get to the end and get everything done properly, and you're represented the best way that you can be represented.
Exactly right. And I will tell you that outside of what Tommy talked about as being a listing agent in that capacity, making sure that his comps and his presentation is correct, not only to the seller, but potentially to an appraiser. On the buying end, you have to also understand, too, we will do our very best, but that appraisal is indeed out of our hands. That is and justifiably so, in light of what the industry had gone through 10 years ago, 8 years ago. It has been completely separated. And Tommy and I have very deep legal responsibilities not to engage appraisers unless they obviously ask in question. It isn't like we can say, hey, can we go talk about this? It generally doesn't work that way. There's a very stern wall that we have to remain behind, and we're very supportive, but our support is only if it's requested. So if it doesn't appraise, it really isn't your realtor's fault, in all honesty. So you got to keep that in mind. It's a third party, and it's unfortunate, but it has its own autonomy within the whole process.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So the appraisal is an important piece, obviously, of the buying of a home, and it hinges on the loan. So hopefully this information we shared with you today helps make sense out of this a little bit more. As always, if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to email us, call us, whatever. We're happy to take them and happy to answer whatever we can. And Eric, do you have anything else you'd like to say?
Absolutely. Just keep in mind that if you like this podcast, we'd really appreciate any comments or some positive feedback, obviously, on one of the many places it's located. But also, Tommy and I offer a service to you at no charge, and that is if you're in an area and you're ready to buy or potentially sell or both, and you don't have a realtor, reach out to us and let us go find you a fantastic realtor in your area, someone that we would hire for ourselves, and we will pass that along to you. It's a no charge fee. It's a referral service, and we really enjoy doing it for you.
Yep, there you go. So next week we will be back with a new episode. You can find us on YouTube and Spreaker. Thank you for the support. We really appreciate it, and we will see you next week. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Thanks a million. See you soon.